the end of the presentation, a few minutes to answer any questions and respond to any comments. And then as a little reminder, if you lose connection or you've entered the wrong session, please feel free to return to the main room for assistance, and you can use the Zoom link that you originally received. So we welcome Annette. Please feel free to go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. It is so good to have you here. Your presence is so encouraging because it means you see the importance of looking at this very important topic of substance use disorder. Addiction is a genuine and complex challenge, and it causes us to have to rethink how do we develop effective, lasting parenting plans for families that you have realized they've experienced a long history of substance use disorder. I am sure you probably all have stories that you could share where you have helped families navigate addictions. I recall many years ago now looking into the eyes of a desperate, exhausted mom of two boys. We were around a boardroom table with a father who had struggled with alcohol for many years. And this mama's not so silent, tear-filled questions burned inside of me as I listened to her. She said, "How can I ever let my babies have time with him? How can I ever trust that they will be safe? And how can anyone ask this of me?" And then I saw dad, who was so fearful that the price he had to pay for his addiction was going to be a lost relationship with his kids. And it was then that I learned, as so many of us do in the moment on the job, that the only way through for this family was going to be to develop a parenting plan that progressed with gradual steps, that had objective standards, that could be measured and confirmed. It was a plan that took mom out of the policing role and it put the accountability back into dad's hands about how quickly we were going to be able to progress. So this family and so many others taught me about what I'm going to share with you today. I am Annette Katchaluba, as Sandra said, from By Peaceful Waters, and I'm the director there of child-centered divorce services. My social work career began at Family and Children's Services, where I was working as an intake worker, family service worker, and I worked in adoption. I spent about 10 years working as an individual child therapist, where many of these little people taught me how they were impacted by separation and
because of the
divorce and
Airbnb,
substance use
I
disorder.
provided it like in May
And I spent
2025 from
15
a
years
certain
at the
date
Office of the
that
Children's
were
Lawyer,
asked for
where I
me,
did
and I
Section
provided
112
those. And if you need to
assessments.
be updated, it's like,
And
Annette,
why
since,
sorry,
did I
there's,
get asked that in
can you
July
mute
or
people? Like, I'm
November?
not sure, Annette, if you're hearing that, but there's like a whole bunch of people
And it's
talking.
like you see, like you.
thank you.
If
Can
everybody
everyone
could
just
please mute themselves, except for Sandy and Annette, that would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. So I spent 10 years as a child therapist, where many of these little people taught me about how they were impacted by separation and divorce and substance use disorder, and 15 years at the Office of the Children's Lawyer, where I did Section 112 assessments. And since 2007, I have focused my practice on providing mediation, parenting coordination, private Section 30 assessments, and Voice of the Child reports at By Peaceful Waters. I frequently prepare parenting plans for families that are going through separation and divorce where one parent has experienced substance use disorder. I see a lot of alcohol addiction, but what we talk about today is going to apply to the use of marijuana or other drugs, prescription medication. So although for simplicity, I will focus the discussion around alcohol, please know that these principles all apply. Substance use disorder is defined as the continued use of a substance despite the significant life consequences. We know that 1 in 8 children are living in a home where there's a parent who has a substance use disorder. And most of these children are under the age of 5. Some studies estimate that as many as 80% of child abuse and neglect cases involve a parent with substance misuse. These children experience educational delays, poor medical and dental care, housing and food insecurities. We see a lack of attunement and emotional care from parents. In my experience, I see that children typically have 2 kinds of responses to substance use disorder. There's those who are parentified, so they try to manage the disorder. And I hear things from them like, I can tell when mom's drinking, and I'm going to try to keep the peace. Or I check the drinks around the house that dad's left, and I'm going to dump them down the sink. I'll get my siblings to bed. I'll make the lunches. I'll wake my parent up to get me to school. And then I see children who present as actually very insecure, and their commentary is all about feeling like no one is taking care of them. And they're very worried about how their needs are going to be met. The good news is we can coach children to have a different response, a more healthy response to parents' substance use. We can teach them that disclosing about abuse isn't tattletaling. Tattletaling is when we are disclosing something for the purpose of getting someone in trouble. A child telling another adult about what's happening with a parent is actually trying to get them out of trouble, not in trouble. And so we encourage children. We want to hear this disclosure. And probably one of the best experiences I had was with a parentified child who I was working with, who I heard the narrative, the parentified narrative. I'll find the drinks, I'll empty them. I'm not telling dad, I'm going to get mom in trouble. And over the years of working with this child, what was really fantastic was I heard the shift. And in one of my last meetings with her, she said, I'm a kid. It's not my job to know how to fix this, but I've learned that I can't keep the secret because then it might make mom more unhealthy. And then she told me about how when her mom says, "Oh, I'm fine," she says, "I just look for examples because I know it's not about being fine with your words. It's about being fine in your actions. So I'm looking for her speech. Is her speech clear? Does she come when I need her? How is the home being cared for?" And she said, "And if I don't have those examples, then I tell dad, mom's not fine. And then I have a way of helping mom get better." And this was a child who watched her mom go from a substance use disorder to almost dying in the hospital, to mom actually recovering and doing much better. And as I walked with her through that process, I saw her make a really healthy shift. She's not the parentified child. She wasn't insecure. She knew her role. I'm here as the kid, but I can access help. It was really lovely to see. Supporting a child with substance use disorder is never a one-size-fits-all arrangement. And it's also not a once and done approach. Each family has a very unique situation, and we need to tailor a parenting plan that meets the needs of families and considers their background, their culture, the particular patterns of the parent who had a substance use disorder. And we balance all of that with safety of children. We're considering their age and stage, their development, and that parent's capacity to provide care for the child. When I think about my role developing parenting plans for families where there's substance use disorder, I am always mindful that we have to think about the safety needs of a child while balancing this with the right of the child to have contact with the parent. Because we understand there's also separation related harm that happens for children when they can't be with a parent. And so that may mean that in extreme cases, we're thinking about how do we structure things in a way that is going to be successful for this family. It may mean that we can't actually structure face-to-face contact, but we could do letter writing or video recordings or maybe have that parent participate in a supervised phone or video call with the child. So today's focus, I am hopeful that what we can do is walk through 4 areas, 4 key ideas about how to help families navigate parenting plans when there's substance use disorder. And I like to think of this through 4 areas of first looking at relapse prevention, looking at a reset. How do we rebuild trust? Reinforcement of a phased-in approach, and then reassessment. And these are the tools that all have to be combined with very frequent coaching for families. One of the things that I've learned about working with families where there's substance use disorder is that people are very overwhelmed and they're really struggling to know, how do I navigate this path forward? And they're usually at max capacity already, and they've lost a sense of hope that there is a way through. So you as professionals are incredibly significant in the process because you are going to be able to provide the coaching that is essential to walking them through each of these key areas. This is usually all new territory for these families to learn, how do I get out of these past patterns and find a way forward? And with substance abuse, we know it's very hard to sustain change. The path feels unclear because we know we can hope for a way forward, and yet we may get really stuck. So we're going to do a deep dive into these 4 areas, and I'm hopeful that actually what we can focus on is, how do we coach people? How do we work with them in this process? So the first area that I want to talk about is relapse prevention. And that is certainly something that we have to just acknowledge is part of that healing journey for families. Relapse is going to be part of the process. We hope it never happens, but we have to plan for it in the event that it does happen. And this is a really tricky piece to talk about because families are very, very sensitive to this. It's actually a very triggering or activating conversation when we talk about relapse prevention, because it often suggests to the parent who has abused substances that you don't believe the changes that they've made. I was working with a family where Carol was addicted to alcohol, and she had been caring for 2 young children who weren't school age. So one of the concerning factors was that there was very limited outside eyes on these children because they didn't have daily contact with professionals. And the father was terrified at the thought of mom having unsupervised contact with the children because she was not only found intoxicated while caring for the children when they lived together, but their 2-year-old had been found wandering in the community, and they had lived on a very busy street. So when dad referenced his fear and his lack of trust in the meeting, he made this comment, well, you're still an addict. Because of course he'd learned what we all learn, that once you are an addict, you are always an addict. But that led to a very explosive response from mom, who did not hold the same view. And her experience of him was, do you see how abusive he is? I've changed and he's calling me an addict. He's actually impeding my recovery because he defines me by my past. And she became so explosive. And then, of course, when we got behind that, identified her fear and her incredible sense of hopelessness, saying, he'll never trust me. I was the primary caregiver, and now he's going to take the kids away from me. So when we talk about this very important area of relapse prevention, we do a lot of coaching. And the language that I use is to say, okay, we're meeting today. I can't mediate the past. What you guys have had to navigate on your own is very challenging and difficult. But today is a reset. We want to move forward. We want to move forward well, and we're going to put in place all the provisions that we need to make this reset. Things are different now. You have professional support, and we're going to move forward with agreements and accountability with professionals. So that might be a conversation I have with parents when they are together in the room. I often will do a lot of coaching individually with each parent. So with the parent who struggled with addiction, I need to help them understand their former partner's lived experience. And so I might say to them, if I asked you, would you ever drink and drive with your children? What would you say to that if this was a situation where I had met you before this incident happened? And they said, well, I would have told you I would never do that. And I say, I believe you. I believe you. Every parent would say, I would never do that. And then now here we are. You've had the situation where you have driven drunk with your children. If I ask you today, now that you're in recovery, are you ever going to do that again? You're going to tell me, no, Annette, I will never do that again. But somewhere between the first no and the today no, it happened. And so we have to consider, what are the checkpoints? What's the planning we can do to prevent relapse so that never happens again? And I remind them, separation and divorce is the second most stressful life event you can go through for anyone. But you combine that with substance abuse disorder. You combine it with a former partner that's saying, I'm not going to let you see our children, and who's very distrustful of the changes you've made. And we can understand that's a lot of stress for anyone to navigate. And so we have to understand that talking about relapse prevention is really protective for you. But also, we have to consider the lived experience of your former partner. I can understand why they're struggling because they only knew you when you struggled with the addiction. They're not living with you right now. They're not seeing all the changes that you're making. So when you share and talk about what you're doing to remain in recovery, it's actually showing how willing you are to follow agreements, to address their fears. And that's going to help them meet the new you. It's going to build confidence that we can proceed in the process because they hear you talking about things like, I have healthy coping strategies. I'm aware of my triggers. I have professional supports like therapy and AA. And so the other parent is going to see you as different. And I also take time in the beginning of the process to talk with the parent who struggled with addiction about the fact that we all have addictive patterns. Some of them might look prettier than others. Having a sugar addiction is generally accepted in our society. Workaholism can look very pretty, but they're all addictive patterns. And so I say to them, I want you to know there's no judgment from me. I see you taking steps to resolve an addiction. You're doing something that most people can't do. And although your former partner doesn't see it, I see it. I hear what you're doing and I see the changes you're making. And I want you to know you have my highest respect because you're blowing apart all the statistics. You are staying engaged in a process that is going to help you be better. And really, you're putting on your superhero parenting cape and saying, I'm going to do this for the sake of my kids. So I want you to know I'm in your corner. I'm on your side here. There's no judgment. You're doing an amazing job. To the parent that has struggled with addiction, I might also talk about the fact that sometimes, although we have stopped the use of substances, we can still have behavioral patterns that replicate an experience that the former partner may have had of them. In our textbooks, we call this being a dry drunk. You may see impatience, anger, frustration, mood swings, selfishness that went from, well, I'm not going to care for the children because I feel like I want to drink and be intoxicated, now shifts to, well, I need to focus on my recovery, so I can't be involved in supporting the family because I need to focus on me. And my recovery can create a lot of feelings of selfishness. And so we talk about, how do you present differently in meetings? How can you respond in a way that is going to be different than that pattern that your former partner would have experienced? And I will ask them, What can I do to help? Because we know that when someone is learning regulation, co-regulation is the way that they begin to learn that. And so we may talk about, can we have a meeting before we go into joint sessions? Can we talk about how you may prepare for the commentary or the feedback from your former partner? And how can you present differently than your former partner has experienced you before? So that's a lot of the coaching that I might do as we're talking about this relapse prevention stage with a parent who struggled with addiction. To the parent who has not struggled with addiction, I may say to them, given what you've seen before, it makes a lot of sense that you're cautious about children going to your former partner. You're very worried about their safety. I'm not going to say to them, you have a right not to trust them. I'd never give my kids to him. I'm going to say to them, I understand that there's concerns and I want to acknowledge your experience. And we take, as professionals, safety decisions very seriously. And so I want you to know we're going to work together to design a process that has very clear, objective factors that are going to take into account your concerns. And we're going to work at rebuilding trust because these objective factors are going to be the safeguards that allow us to move forward well. So let's talk about that, how we move from relapse planning to building a parenting plan that is going to be the reset and rebuild trust. The first thing that I try to help families understand is that building trust is really, really challenging because it has been broken and safety is a concern. And so rebuilding trust has to be considered a process, not an event. And rebuilding trust is not about finding trust in one another anymore. Trust is not something that maybe can be rebuilt between the two parents. Trust is something that is built in the process because now there's confidence that agreements are going to be followed. And we are going to have confidence and accountability come through objective factors. And to the parent who struggled with addiction, I will say to them, these are just standard safeguards that we put in place when there's a history of substance use disorder so that we can ensure that everyone can move forward confidently. The family that I shared with you at the beginning of the presentation is the family that I started to use this language with. And we discussed that they were the experts on their life. I don't claim to be an expert on anyone's life. And we needed to work together to develop a list of factors that would build confidence and have them move forward. This is a very critical part of the process because both parents have to be confident. We know that children read body language. If you have the privilege of having children or you've had them in your life, think about a time when they have done something across the room and you as a parent has said nothing, but you've just looked at them. And they know exactly what you think and feel about their behavior. I always share with parents, this is the double-edged sword of attachment. Children know exactly what you think and feel without you using words. So when we are wanting to help a family move forward with parenting time, we have to have both parents on board because children are going to read the body language. And this is where we get a situation where a parent will say confidently, I told them to go. I told them you should have time with your parent, but the kids don't want to. And where children experience divided loyalties, because when a parent is not confident, children read that body language. And so it's very important that we bring both children or both parents into the process of saying, how do we develop objective factors that are going to build confidence so that you can move forward together as parents in a parenting plan? So with this family, we started to brainstorm together. And the first thing they said is, well, I want to this. The mom was able to say, Dad's a good dad when he's not drinking. So as long as he agrees he's not going to consume alcohol for 12 hours, or in some families I work with, they say 24 hours before caring for children. And during the time that they're in a caregiving role, then I can agree to some parenting time. Um, What's wonderful is that we can all access that Cadillac version of breathalyzers called SoberLink. If you haven't familiarized yourself with that, I encourage you to do so. SoberLink is an amazing product that allows a parent to show very clearly, have they used a substance, have they not? And families can work together to talk about test times. That might be designed based on the history and patterns of the user. For some families, they want random testing. For other families, they want regularly scheduled testing. For some substances, we know a test will show a certain amount of time that they have used substances, and beyond that, it doesn't read accurately. And so we have to do that research. What is the substance that's been used? What is a test that will give confidence that the children will be in someone's care and we will have a sober caregiver? And so we look at that together. We also sometimes talk about the cost of testing. For some families, this is absorbed by one parent, the parent who struggled with substance use. For other families, they will come up with unique arrangements. One family I worked with, dad was very confident that he was abstaining from the use of substances, mom was not. And so they made an agreement together. He would do some testing at particular intervals throughout the week of his parenting time. And if the test came back negative, mom would pay for it. And if it came back positive, dad would pay for it. And that was their way through when he was using marijuana. So there's ways that we can build confidence. Of course, we can use urine tests, hair analysis. Breathalyzers are really, really helpful. Objective factors might also include feedback from professionals. So we talk about, why don't we check in with the teachers? If kids have had an overnight at one parent's home, and a teacher says, you know, when they come from this particular home, they don't look like they've slept. They don't have lunches. They don't have what they need. We're really concerned about the kind of care they have. That is an important piece of feedback that we want to bring to our process. If children are going to school and a teacher says, I can't tell the difference which home they come from, that's also important feedback that we bring to the process. Sometimes objective factors will include information about driving. If a parent has a history of driving intoxicated, we might have confidence that we can move forward if that parent agrees they're not driving with the children. And a visit schedule might be structured where the parent who has not struggled with substances is the one that does the drop off and pickup. Or potentially it's, let's use a breathalyzer before exchanges so that we know you are not driving intoxicated. Another objective factor might be visit schedules are followed. Arrival and departure times are honored. And we don't have any concerns about, we thought we were exchanging the children at 5 and now it's 6 o'clock and nobody knows where they are. For some families, they can't engage in visits yet in the community, in the home because of the safety concerns, but they can agree to visits in the community. So visits might be structured in an environment where we know there's lots of public eyes around and lots of safe strangers. So we can teach a child, you know the librarian's name, or you are at early on where you know the staff. And if there's concerns, you have people that you can talk to. And we know people that can share, here's what your child's experience was like in this environment. Supervised parenting time centers are wonderful as well. The challenges, they're often maxed out, and so it's hard to get in and it's hard to get frequency of parenting time. So we want to think about these other creative solutions. If a family can agree that contact will happen in a home, sometimes that happens because one of the objective factors is that the parent has demonstrated there's safe storage of any substances. This, of course, is really important with edibles that might look appealing to children, or for youth who potentially get into drugs because they find parent prescription medication. Parents might agree that they have exchanges that occur with no interactions. They might use supervised exchanges, or they may agree that during the exchanges, one parent is going to stay in their residence, the other stays in their vehicle, the child goes between. And then because that is being honored and there's no conflict, it builds confidence. We can work together. We can follow plans. I had one family that they put on their objective factor list that the parenting schedule and the holiday schedule can move forward as planned as long as any holidays that were planned were done in alcohol-free locations. Because there was a concern that when dad went on trips, that might be a time he's inclined to use alcohol. And so this gave a bit of confidence. He was willing to agree to that, and that allowed them to move forward. Other things that may be included in an objective factor list might be that communication is between the parents and only about child-related topics. This speaks to that concern about a dry drunk, someone where a lot of conflict can escalate. And so using communication appropriately builds confidence. We are moving forward differently. Some families use the email service that we offer because they're struggling with their communication so badly that they need to build more confidence. And that service involves a family sending an email to me. If I think it's appropriate, I send it through. If it's not appropriate, I work with them, coach them. Here's how we can take what you want to say, draft it in an appropriate email. And so again, confidence comes because we all agreed we'd follow the email service, and we did. Agreements to use a parenting coordinator or a professional to support them should they hit any roadblocks can help build confidence in a parenting plan. Another objective factor is that the parent who struggled with the use of substances will agree to continue to access their supports, counseling, community supports like their AA groups. Sometimes both parents will agree that we're both going to access community supports to learn how to support the children, and that builds confidence that we can move forward with a plan. In the family that I talked about at the beginning, there was an agreement that the parents would, dad would maintain therapy, and that the therapist could provide feedback to the professional team and to mom that dad was progressing well in therapy. The reason that we started to talk about this was because I had an interesting experience when I worked at Family and Children's Services, where I was supporting a mom as a family service worker who had a substance use addiction. She was struggling with alcohol, and she agreed to go to counseling, which was fantastic. And so 6 months later, I said to her, "This is so great. You seem to be doing so well. Can I speak with your therapist?" She said, "Of course." And so I talked with the therapist, got this glowing report about all the changes that mom has made. And then I said to the therapist, "Well, tell me about how she's been doing managing her substance use and alcohol." And the therapist said, "What substance use?" And I thought, oh gosh, mom never raised that with the therapist. All this therapy has been so helpful in every area except the one that we needed in. So because I knew that, when I was working with this family and dad said, "Yes, I'll agree to go to therapy," I said, "What if we structure it this way?" So I said, "What if dad meets with the therapist for 2 or 3 times, establishes a good rapport, and then mom meets with his therapist, not to hear feedback from the therapist, not to disclose anything that dad has said, but so that the therapist can hear what mom's lived experience was like." Because then when we ask the therapist to give feedback about how dad has used counseling and progressed in counseling, mom is going to be able to say, "This therapist understood what I lived through. And so now this therapist can speak to my concerns." Of course, always with dad's consent, always with disclosures and agreements in place. But it was really helpful for her because her concern was dad's going in there with a therapist and is going to do a self-report. And this therapist is not going to understand my lived experience. So how can I feel confident from this therapist saying, "Yes, dad's doing great"? The other thing that I put often on an objective factor list is that we're going to do safety planning for kids in both homes. Children need to have a safety plan in both homes. And this is a safety plan for what can they do in the event that a caregiver is unresponsive or unable to provide care for them. And we don't even need to explain to children, we're doing this because you have a parent who has struggled with substance use, because in fact, we should really do this with children all the time. This might be dating me, but when I was little, there was a phone on the wall that everybody knew where it was. It always worked, never had to be charged. And if I pressed 0, I could talk to a live person. Children today often don't have access to a phone. If they do have access to their parents' phone, they might not know the password or how to make an emergency call. And they're, in my opinion, left far more vulnerable than when we had landlines. And so I say to parents, part of an objective factor is teaching kids what's the safety plan. If a parent can't be available to you, what are you going to do? So they need to know what a safe stranger is. A safe stranger is someone who has a job, they have a name tag, they have equipment on them that matches their job and name tag. And I encourage parents, introduce them. One family said, well, we have someone that is in the reception area of our building, of our apartment building. We always have a professional there, a security person. So they introduced the kids there and said, this is a safe stranger. And if you ever needed help, you could always go to this person. They will help you. We teach children, how do you call 911? And I think it's really important that we do that coaching, because then a parent knows, okay, they have a plan should there be a problem. Sometimes it's a neighbor. There's an elderly couple. They're always home. Kids know them. We talk to the kids about how this is part of the safety plan. The other thing that we typically put in parenting plans is that children can be interviewed. And that might be on a yearly basis, or it might be as a parent requests it. And this interview is not for interrogation. This interview is to help just get a pulse on how kids are doing. And the hope is we hear about lots of great things happening in both homes. So we're not asking children to monitor a parent, but we're hearing from them what's working, what's not working, what can parents do better? How can we be more supportive to you? And we listen when we do this for an assessment from the child about how they're coping in both homes. This is very important to build confidence, because sometimes a parent will say, I'm worried about the child, but they're not going to disclose anything to me. Or a parent will say, this child is consistently bringing home a negative narrative and I don't know. Is that because there's only bad things going on, or is it that they're just processing in the moment and actually they are okay, but they're venting and they're struggling? So building an objective factor that says at any point a child can be interviewed if a parent requests it can be really helpful. The other objective factor that I like to put in every one of them is what I call the no questions asked clause. If a parent calls and says, I need you to take the children, no questions are asked. The parent who has been sober and not struggled with addiction is just going to go and make arrangements to pick up the child. And in one family situation, that parent said, I can't always guarantee that because I work out of town. And so what they agreed was that if that parent couldn't be available, the parent who was saying, I need you to take the children, would use the emergency contact list. And they had a list of people that had agreed to be on their emergency contact list who would drop what they were doing and go get the children. And so it was a really helpful way forward, because we said, essentially, it's not so concerning that you may struggle with relapse. What's concerning is that there's no plan to keep kids safe if you're struggling with relapse. So the no questions asked clause gave permission for everyone to say, we can just say, it's not working, take the kids quick, and we're keeping kids safe. And I've had many parents, the sober parent that says to me, that actually builds the most confidence in the plan. If they will call me and say, I'm not doing well today and I can keep the kids safe, then I feel confident putting the kids in their care because I know they'll prioritize the needs of the children. So we always work together to develop this list of objective factors. And there's two things we're trying to achieve. The first one is that we can have some confidence to move forward because we know that these factors are in place. So with the parent who struggled with addiction, I will coach them to say, this is going to build the confidence you need. You are no longer being evaluated based on your past, but you're going to be evaluated based on present information. And so we don't have to feel like I'll never earn the trust of the other parent. You can say, you have confidence, the parent can have confidence in you because you are following agreements. And I also will often hear a parent struggle with one objective factor. I'm sure you can guess what it is, which is, why do I have to do testing? Why doesn't the other parent have to do testing? And I say to them, listen, your audience is the judge. On Judgment Day, we stand before the judge and account for ourselves, not the other. So I want you to think about this situation of you being asked to do testing as your audience is the judge. You don't need to ask the other parent to do testing just because you were asked to do testing. You are accounting for you. You never have to stand before a judge and account for someone else. So you need to think about the judge as your audience. And testing tells the judge, I'm sober. Testing tells the judge, I am taking my relapse prevention seriously. Showing letters from professionals that you're using services shows the judge, I am making sure I keep the supports in place that I need. This all shows that you acknowledge that there was a problem and you're going to ensure that your children are safe. So that is why we put in these objective factors. The second reason we put in objective factors is because confidence that the other parent is not going to subjectively remove parenting time or not move forward is protected, because the deal is, as long as we can check the boxes on the objective factors, we will be moving forward in the parenting. So the other parent has now the accountability that they will be moving forward in a phased-in plan. And they're not going to just unilaterally prevent parenting time because it's just not feeling good. We all develop the list of objective factors. We all know that this is now protective for both parents. To the parent who has not had an addiction, I may do some coaching to say parents can love their children deeply and their addiction can still make it unsafe for them to be with a child. So we're only going to move forward if the objective factors are in place. We have those checks and balances, but when they're in place, we've accounted for risk, we've accounted for safety, and so we have to move forward. And the reason we want to agree to these objective factors is because you, as the sober parent, has had the awful role of having to police and try to hold this other parent accountable. And now we want to take that off of you and actually put a lot of this accountability for how quickly we move through the process into the hands of the parent who struggled with the addiction. Because as long as they're willing to meet these objective factors, we are going to be able to move forward. This, of course, can really help to make sure that we are keeping conflict low and we're keeping families out of court when possible, which is so helpful. So the next tool that we use is reinforcements, and we're reinforcing this whole parenting plan that says we're going to have a certain schedule built on objective factors by developing a phased-in plan. So that's the reinforcement that we do. We are in a phased-in plan. And this plan allows for constant reassessment. We are going to outline 3 or 4 phases of the plan that have always the same goalpost. Objective factors have to be met, but they gradually increase parenting time. They increase a parent's freedom and flexibility with a child because the objective factors have been met and we've built trust into our process. So one of the hopes is that the phases are done in a very gradual way. I always encourage parents, front load your process. The early phases have to have more safeguards, more checks and balances than later phases, because we know that if we put you in a position where we have to go backwards, we've asked maybe over-promising than what's actually sustainable, trust will be broken. And we know for children that if we're asking them to be vulnerable and asking them to move forward, we have got to make sure that we're always moving in the forward direction. We're never moving backwards. And so the phased-in plan is going to be outlined in sometimes weeks or months. And we're talking about how this plan has time-limited steps. that is going to make sure that it's protective for children. The parent who struggled with addiction can sometimes feel like they always have to earn parenting time or convince the other parent. And in this case, we're saying you don't. As long as you move through the phases, keeping the objective factors in place, the time is yours to have. This, of course, removes the responsibility on the sober parent to do the policing, to do the assessment. It puts the decision of how fast things progress back into the hands of the parent who has struggled. So the factors that we consider in phases are going to be things like the ages and stages of children. If you have very young children, they don't have any capacity to assess situations and protect themselves. That's different than maybe an adolescent who has a phone, who has a bus pass, who has capacity to say, I can get myself up in the morning and go to school. And also, we consider phases knowing the patterns of people. If we know that a parent really struggles with drinking, but only in the evening after their long, stressful day at work, maybe we talk about a phased-in plan that includes supervision only at night because we know that's a risk. Or maybe we say there's a concern about driving intoxicated, but if they show up sober in the community, a parent feels confident. So the beginning phases might include something like that. When you are in your initial phases bringing in supervision, it's really, really important that both parents feel confident in who the supervisor is, particularly if it's a family member, because family members sometimes are part of the historical pattern of enabling a parent who has struggled with substance use. And so I had one parent I remember meeting with, and the mom had said his father cannot be the supervisor. And so I met with the father, and I'd met with this gentleman who I thought had an interesting smell about him. And I was thinking, have you been using substances? And then the dad said to me, oh, he always wears this cologne, and I wish he'd stop wearing it because it makes him smell like alcohol. And I thought, oh my goodness, you're missing it. You've bought into this narrative that this child, adult child of yours, is smelling like alcohol because of the cologne he wears. It's not the cologne. He's using alcohol to cope. And so we talk about, again, who are the people that can provide the supervision. When I worked at Family and Children's Services, when we had parents who struggled with all sorts of challenges with their children, we would always talk about, we start with supervised parenting time, but that's not a long-term solution. So how do we transition from supervised parenting time to maybe community parenting time where the safe strangers are around, like I said, libraries, early on centers, taking a child to an extracurricular where the parent maybe has limited parenting time. How do we gradually introduce unsupervised parenting time? Maybe we start with a few hours that moves into an overnight, but an early morning pickup the next day. And then how do we structure 2 overnights? So we talk about with parents that in a phased-in plan, supervision is considered a bridge. It's not a punishment. It's a way for children to safely reconnect. It lowers the vigilance of both the sober parent, who's very concerned about moving forward and trusting, but also the vigilance of children who need to rebuild confidence that they are there to receive care from a parent as opposed to being the caretaker of the parent. So it actually is something that can really help parents move forward. I like to structure phased-in plans based around a calendar. So if I was meeting with a family today, I might say to them, let's think about a plan from now till March break. And the reason I think about this is because that makes sense to children. If you ask young children, how's next Thursday looking for you? They're like, I didn't even know I had a next Thursday. But if you say to them, the plan from now till March break, and then the plan from March break until summertime, and then summer break, and then we're going to make a plan for when school starts again. Children get that, and they can follow along with that. So I had a family that I worked with where we talked about the first phase was about 3 months long. It was like a January to March plan, and dad had half-day visits. It was a restricted number of hours. It was only a couple of hours, and it had to be in the community. And mom was the one to do the drop off, and the agreement was he wouldn't approach her during exchanges. And they were able to follow that. And so our second phase, which was for 2 months, included a 6-hour day. So now he had a longer time. It was still in a public setting, and they added in one weeknight evening, which was going to be at his residence from 5 to 7, and it was to have dinner and then to get the child to the program. And the program was really close to his residence, so that was great. The plan was to walk together. And then the third phase was a duration of about 3 months, and that was where they agreed that he would have an entire day with the child, and the access could occur in his home, but he still wasn't driving. And then we talked about now we're going to need a reassessment date. We're going to need a plan to say, a new schedule is going to be negotiated after we've gone through the first 3 phases, because it's really hard for us to know what's the next step. We got to get through the first 3 and then we'll have more information. One family I worked with, we couldn't even start with a phased in plan like that. They were so overwhelmed with the level of addiction that actually where we started was I said to them, what could we do tomorrow? After tomorrow, what could we do on Monday? What could we do for Wednesday that week? What could we do from now until we have our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from now? And so we just mapped out a 2-week plan. And then we met and we said in that 2-week plan, how did things go? Were the objective factors met? Where did things go right? Where did it go wrong? Could we replicate this plan for the following week? Could we add something to it? And we had to really slow down this phased in plan because they were not able to think about a 2-month plan. The trust had been so broken. And so we just set dates. Here's when we can revisit this. And sometimes it's right at our next meeting, which has to be a week from now because we can't even make it longer than 7 days. A phasing plan might look very different than timelines. It might just say after 6 successful visits, or after 3 clean screens, or after there has been a schedule followed consistently for a 30-day period. And we might structure phases like that. But the idea is create a plan where there's concrete expectations. Everyone can check boxes. Is this working? Is this a plan that we're all following? Because that, of course, brings us back to building trust. And then we have to ask the question, what do we do if there's relapse? If there's relapse, we go back to phase 1. We all know the plan. There's no mystery in that. We just go back to phase 1. This is the phase that we started out in. So in an approach like this, we're not taking a 3 strikes you're out kind of approach. We're not being unrealistic that relapse isn't part of the healing journey. We know it is. So let's plan for it. We don't hope for it, but we plan for it. And so that's the kind of conversation I would have with parents. What's phase 1? Is this the plan we go back to when there has been relapse? Okay, and then the last tool that we are going to talk about is the reassessment. So let me just, sorry, I just lost my, here we are. I lost my screen. So reassessment is again about answering the question, what if? The what if barrier is really hard to get through with families. They will say things to me like, well, what if we're nearing the end of a phase and I don't feel like we've really hit the mark on all the objective factors? What if this change that we're outlining from now, for the next 6 months in this gradual plan, what if it's not sustainable? What if they say they're going to go to those appointments and then we find out from the therapist they didn't actually attend any of the appointments? What if is a very hard barrier to get through. And so reassessment of the whole plan is important, and reassessment at each of the steps, each of the phases is important. So we don't move on to the next phase until we've had a meeting. So if our phase was from now till March break, we might talk about at the end of February or the beginning of March. Let's put a date on the calendar where we're going to evaluate. How did things go with the objective factors? Did all the information that we needed to come to the process come? Did we determine that our projected phases are still workable, or do we need to do a revamp on these phases? And again, we're bringing both parents into this discussion because they both have to be on board. Reassessment might occur because we look at their situation and we say, we've made a plan now for the next 6 months, but we have no idea really how we go from we're still in a supervised stage right now to what happens when we've started to introduce overnights. Do we go to full weekends? Do we develop a regular parenting schedule? Just a lot of unanswered questions. And so a parenting plan, like the one I shared with you, where we walked through the months, we actually said, this takes us to the following January, to the next new year. So let's plan a meeting in January that says, on this date, we will map out the next 6 months, or we will map out a plan for the next year, because now we will have more information. So when we have done that, we have to always be mindful about coaching. The parent who has struggled with the addiction might try to argue against some of these safeguards. Things might go really well for them in the first few months, and they start to say, are all these phases really necessary? We're doing fine here. Kids are doing great. Like, why is this taking so long? They might push for unsupervised time to happen too quickly. The other red flag that can come up is with the parent who is the sober parent. They might get into this and start to feel like, I'm worried. Things are progressing. They're progressing okay, but again, the what ifs. I want to move the goalposts, or I don't know that I can really accept all of this evidence of change. I don't know if I feel confident. And so reassessment means looking at each of their areas of concern and reminding them we built the objective factors together. We all said if these are met, we need to move forward with these phases. If we're modifying phases, it's because we're all in agreement. Sometimes a parent who is sober will talk about safety language that is there to kind of control or to punish. I don't feel safe with you. And so again, we have to turn that into objective factors. Do we need to revisit our objective factor list? How do we build more confidence now that this particular issue has come up in this phase so that we can move to the next phase? So let's revisit the objective factors and make sure that everyone feels confident. When we see this, again, we have to remember trust is not in one another. It is built into the fact that we all follow the same agreements. The other thing that can happen that requires us to have a reassessment date is that we can't account for all possible changes of circumstance. Sometimes a parent has moved in with their parents or a friend for support, but they're saying, what if my housing situation changes and I'm able to move out on my own? Or what if I have my license back by then? If that happens, can we change the agreement that we've made around driving or around transportation? And so I like to be able to say, you have both done a really great job making this plan that has objective factors, that's phased in. And I think we've done as much as we can based on the information we have. So let's get us to the end of June, and let's plan that in June, we will have a meeting that will plan for the summer. And then we'll all have more information. So in conclusion, I want to remind you that your job isn't to decide in this process and in your role as a professional who's right, who's wrong, who's really telling the truth. Your job is just to help this family design a set of conditions where the children are not put at risk. The concerned parent can now breathe, knowing there's objective factors. The parent who has struggled with addiction now has a very clear and achievable path going forward through these objective factors, but also the phased-in agreement. And most importantly, your job is to stay present with these families and to really offer them the coaching and the constant support that they need to navigate this very complex topic in a healthy way and in a child-focused way. So thank you, everyone, for your listening. And we can now hear from you. Does anyone have any questions?
Do you do plans with 16-year-olds, or where do you feel like kids age out of this kind of process?
So my understanding is Family and Children's Services extended their age range to 18 children who need protection are considered, that we need to consider them between the ages of 16 and 18. And again, we would consider the unique needs of that family and the age and stage of the child. Just because a child at age-wise is 16 doesn't mean that they're functioning as a 16-year-old in a way that we can say, yep, you can navigate this on your own. So my thought is, yes, we would talk with parents about that, but it would look really different than maybe planning for a 2-year-old.
And do you mostly do kind of court connected work, or do you do some that's not court connected?
I work with families where the referral has been through collaborative family law. That would be the commitment to not work through the court. I work with families where litigation lawyers are coming and saying, we need a plan because we're going to court and we don't know how to map out a parenting plan that is reasonable. And so can you help us do that? And then certainly in my work where I'm providing Section 30 assessments or voice of the child, that's often where families have engaged the court. And so they're looking for feedback from that.
We have a few more minutes if anybody else has questions. I know there's a comment in the chat from Barbara saying, absolutely excellent. Thank you, Annette, for sharing your knowledge, experience, and compassion. It's an honor to learn from you. And I would have to echo that. We really appreciate your thoughtful presentation on such an important and sensitive topic. That's for sure. So I'm not sure if there's other comments or questions that folks have. We have a couple more minutes before we have to head back to the main room.
Annette, I was wondering if what happens, is there a major change if both parents have addiction issues and you might be working in that setting, but there's a variation in where they're at in that, or if there's addiction issues with two parents and you're working with kin and a much bigger family unit is I'm assuming that a lot of what you've just giving us around coaching just takes a little longer time because now you're dealing with kin, you're dealing with two parents in that, but I just
Exactly. Yep, but the principles are always the same. So we have to do planning for relapse for both. We have to talk about how are we going to build trust through these objective factors. How do we develop this in a phased-in way so that it's successful? We're not jumping in too fast. And then how do we reassess the conversation? Keeps going on over and over again, checking in with people. And the one thing I've learned is, particularly with families where there's been substance use, is that it's really helpful as a professional if you reach out and do the check-in. These are individuals that typically aren't checking in until things are really escalating. So for a dad that I'm working with right now, he's definitely presenting as the dry drunk. He gets very emotional and very overwhelmed, and something can happen and he can really fall apart. But I said to him, can I just meet with you every once in a while, every couple weeks? Can we just put a date on the calendar? If you need to cancel or you don't need support that day, no problem, we'll just cancel. But can we put a date on the calendar? Because he doesn't have a lot of good supports right now where he's getting good feedback. The feedback he often gets from people that he accesses support from is, you're doing so great, it's too bad she can't trust you. And that, of course, escalates him again. So we do a check-in frequently. And when I noticed when I would wait for people to check in with me, we would check in after they were so escalated, it was really hard to get back and refocused. And a lot of the coaching is about reminding them what they're doing, that they really are doing such a fantastic job of hitting an issue head on that is so challenging. And it's so important that we encourage them. Keep at it. We're here to support you, and to remind them that they're not the totality of their failures in the past, that actually there's an incredible thing that they're doing for their family in the future.
Thank you.
There's a couple more comments in the chat. Well done, very insightful and worthwhile, very informative. Absolutely, we agree. So a few have asked about the presentation, if the slides will be available, and they are available by the link that you received this morning in the flyer. They're also available on Dropbox. And if you need more information, please feel free to reach out to anybody, any of us, by email, and we'll make sure that you have the link, connect you with the link. I'm not sure if there's any more questions.
There's probably a wealth of experience in this room. I would love to hear if anyone has had other strategies that they've used, or if they've replicated any of what I've shared today and found that helpful.
Can I ask a question? It's Tanya. Sorry to have my video on.
Sure.
What are you tending to use for testing for alcohol? I've had parents say, I could get tests off Amazon or go to the doctor's office. What are your families using, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, so the Cadillac version, of course, is SoberLink. There's a price tag to that, but it's phenomenal. SoberLink can actually detect if it's your breath that has provided the sample. It takes a video of you using that, and if the video doesn't have the clarity that SoberLink likes, it will deem it as an unsuccessful test. You can't really mess up SoberLink. And so I will often encourage families, if you can do that and afford it, please do. There's times where people will order a breathalyzer off Amazon, and that can work, although we have to be mindful that you want to play around with it and test it ahead of time, because sometimes it will be sensitive to things like mouthwash or something else that is clearly not that you've used alcohol. So I encourage parents, get it, work with it, test it, make sure it's great. That's really helpful. Often with families, I'll hear, well, I don't want to test in front of my kid. I don't want them to see this. So I said, well, great. Then when you're ready to go out the door and you need to provide a test because everyone wants, or they want to see that you are driving sober, then why don't you say, we all use the bathroom before we leave? And when you use the bathroom, do your test. And parents will take a video of them using the breathalyzer and send that to the other parent. SoberLink has a really great thing, because you can decide who's going to receive the results from that. So that would just immediately go to everyone. Those are my favorites. I find them most helpful for families. And the agreement is, if you ever are testing negative again, or sorry, testing positive, that then we are pausing the parenting schedule. We must now take that very seriously. So often I will hear things with substance use like, well, it wasn't that I wasn't going to test, but we were in the middle of a movie and I couldn't test, or I just forgot the device at home. And we take that seriously, that this is part of building the accountability for us to move forward. So that might be reason to say, we didn't follow the objective factors. We don't move to the next phase until we can get through this period of time where everyone has agreed that the objective factors has been met. Marijuana is a really tricky one, because marijuana can stay in your system, although there are some tests now, saliva tests, and they're working on breath tests that will help show a more limited time period, like in the last however many hours, much like the testing we have for alcohol. But it is a little trickier. One family I had, we learned, because dad had used marijuana so long, that when he did the testing, even though he said, why is this positive? I haven't used it. They said, your system, it will be in your system for many months. So what they came up with was an agreement that every time he did the testing, they had to see that the percentage and the numbers were decreasing, to show that obviously he hadn't added more substances. So that was their way through on that.
Thank you so much, Annette. We are almost out of time. So again, Annette is her contact information. Tammy has put it in the chat at the very top. So please feel free to connect with her afterwards. She has said that she'd be happy to connect with folks. So that information's there. Also, the link to the main meeting room. Oh, I see there's a new comment. Hang on here. Oh, Tina, thank you so very much. So there's a link to the main meeting room also, or you can rejoin by your own link that was sent to you. There's nothing. Oh, another one.
Sorry, where's the link? Sandra, sorry.
That's okay. It's Tammy has put the one in the chat. Using that one, you'll have to re-register
Okay, got it.
to have your original from your email.
Okay, thank you.
Register for that one. And then, so on behalf of the Provincial ADR Advisory Committee, we want to thank Annette so very much for sharing with us today. It was absolutely amazing, excellent. And thank you for everyone for participating in this learning session. And so we can return to the main meeting room, and we're going to be listening to Dean Anderson, the inspirational speaker. So thank you again, Annette.